This happened just a couple of weeks ago. I was out at Walmart late at night. It was around 8 o'clock, and I had planned to grab just a few items, nothing too out of the ordinary. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just a regular trip. I didn't expect anything unusual to happen. I've gone to Walmart at night before, and it was usually pretty quiet. It wasn't too busy, and it wasn't completely dead either, just normal for that time of night. I walked inside and headed straight for the soap aisle. I had a specific brand in mind and didn't want to waste any time. The aisles were quiet, just the sound of the occasional cart rolling past and the soft hum of the store's lights above. As I made my way down the aisle, I remember noticing a man walking in the opposite direction. He was wearing a shirt that said, "Human Mammal" on it. I remember it clearly because the words seemed so random, and for some reason, it stuck in my mind. I passed him by without thinking much about it. Just another stranger in the store. I grabbed my soap and continued on my way. The rest of my shopping went by without issue. I picked up a few more items, nothing major, and headed toward the back end of the store. I spent a little more than 5 minutes back there, getting the last few things on my list. When I was done, I turned around and headed back towards the front of the store. It wasn't until I got about halfway to the front that I noticed something strange. It was eerily quiet in that part of the store. It was almost like the atmosphere had changed. But there was one person there, a man. The same man I had seen earlier, the one wearing the Human Mammal shirt. He was standing in an aisle, and he was throwing things off the shelves. Random items were scattered across the floor around him. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Why was he doing this? What was his purpose? I couldn't help but stare. I kept walking, but as I passed him, I stopped. I was confused, and I had to ask. I wasn't angry or anything. I was genuinely curious. "What are you doing?" I asked, not in a rude tone, just wondering what his deal was. The man stopped for a moment, looked at me, and then continued throwing items to the ground. He didn't answer my question. He just ignored me completely, as if I hadn't even spoken. I looked around, and I didn't see any employees in the immediate area. I couldn't understand what was happening. Then, out of nowhere, he turned and gave me the middle finger. It was such a bizarre thing to do that it left me speechless. I didn't say anything in return. I didn't know what to say. It was just strange. But at the same time, it felt almost like he was intentionally trying to cause trouble. I decided not to engage with him any further. Someone would probably see what he was doing soon enough, and he'd either be kicked out or banned from the store. I kept walking towards the front of the store and got to the self-checkouts. I wasn't in any rush, but the whole encounter had left me feeling unsettled. I quickly scanned my items and paid for them. As I was about to leave the store, I glanced back over my shoulder, and there he was again. The man was standing near the exit, and he was staring right at me. I wasn't sure if he was just leaving at the same time, or if he was intentionally following me. But for some reason, I decided to look again. It was like some strange instinct made me turn around. When I did, I saw him about 50 feet back watching me. It was a weird feeling, like I was being stalked, but I didn't know for sure. It could have been a coincidence. I shrugged it off and continued to the parking lot. But just as I was walking to my car, I looked behind me again, and this time, the man was right behind me. He was standing directly behind my car, and his eyes were locked on me through the rear window. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe it. Had he been following me all along? Why was he doing this? I stood there frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to drive away without knowing if he'd follow me. I waited for about a minute, and during that whole time, he didn't move at all. He just stood there, staring. It was almost as if he was daring me to do something. I finally rolled down my window and shouted at him, asking him to move. He didn't react. It was as if I hadn't said a word. I honked my horn, and still, he didn't move an inch. The man just stood there with the same blank expression on his face. At that point, I was beyond confused. What was his deal? I turned off my engine, got out of the car, and walked toward him. I didn't want to get too close, but I had to say something. "What's your problem?" I asked, my voice a little shaky now. I didn't want to get into a confrontation, but I also didn't know how else to deal with him. He still didn't respond. He ignored me completely, just staring at me. I decided I wasn't going to stand around and argue with him. I couldn't handle the situation alone. So, I walked back toward the store. As soon as I started moving, he started following me again. This time, he was a little closer, maybe about 10 feet behind me. It felt like he was deliberately trailing me, and I wasn't sure what to do. By the time I made it back inside the Walmart, I could hear him walking right behind me. I wasn't sure if he was planning on following me in, but I kept walking. I passed the self-checkout area, and I noticed a few employees standing around, talking. They must have seen me and noticed the situation. One of them approached the man and tried to talk to him. The man didn't respond, but another employee stepped in front of him, blocking his way. It was clear that the employees had been informed of his behavior earlier in the store, and they were now confronting him about throwing things off the shelves. Finally, someone was dealing with him. I was able to slip away without any more issues. I walked back toward the entrance and left the store as quickly as I could. I glanced back one last time to see the man still talking with the employees. His behavior no longer my problem. I haven't seen him since. I don't know if he was banned from the store, but I do know that I never want to experience anything like that again. The whole thing felt like a nightmare, and I'm not sure what his motives were. It was like he was just trying to cause chaos for no reason at all. It's funny looking back. I can't help but think about how strange the whole situation was. It wasn't like a robbery or something that made sense. It was just a man, seemingly trying to start trouble. I hope I never run into him again, but part of me wonders if I was just unlucky that night. I don't know why he decided to target me. Maybe it was random. Maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But for some reason, that night stands out in my mind as one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had. A few years ago, when I was 16, I worked at Walmart as well. It was my first job, and I was just trying to save up enough money for a car. It wasn't too far from my parents' house, and I worked there a few nights a week after school. One night, I had a shift that ran from 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock. It was a quiet evening, not too many customers. I worked as a cashier, and I had a pretty uneventful shift. It wasn't until I got off early, at around 8:45 p.m., that things started to take a strange turn. After I clocked out, I texted my mom to let her know I was done with work. I left the store and went outside to wait for her to pick me up. I sat down on one of the benches by the entrance, my phone in hand, just passing the time. It was getting late, but the parking lot was still pretty full. I watched as a car drove through the parking lot slowly. It was an older SUV, and it circled the lot a couple of times before coming to a stop right in front of me. The driver rolled down the passenger side window and asked if I needed a ride. He said he could drive me home or anywhere I wanted to go. I was immediately on edge. Something about the situation felt off, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I told him no, but he insisted, still sitting there with the window rolled down, staring at me. Finally, he opened his door and got out of the car, heading straight toward me. At that point, I bolted for the store. I didn't even look back until I was safely inside. The man hadn't followed me into the store, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later, my mom arrived, and when I told her what happened, she was furious. She told me to report the incident to the police, but I never did. It seemed too minor at the time, and I figured it was nothing. But now, thinking back, I realize how close I came to something dangerous. I never thought much about the idea of following people around, or of being followed. In the normal course of life, it's just not something that crosses your mind. That is, until it happens to you. What started as a regular trip to Walmart turned into a chilling encounter I won't soon forget. It was a seemingly ordinary day when I walked into the store to grab a few things, not knowing that my experience would take a dark turn. It started like any other shopping trip. I was at my local Walmart around noon, the aisles buzzing with activity. The store was pretty crowded, as usual, and I navigated through the maze of shelves, picking out groceries and everyday essentials. I wasn't paying much attention to anyone else, just focused on getting my items. But then, a man approached me in one of the aisles. He looked like he might be in his late 30s or early 40s. He was about average height, maybe 5'8", with glasses and a bald head. At first, it didn't strike me as odd. He smiled at me and casually asked what I was shopping for. His tone was friendly, but something about it felt off too casual for a stranger. I told him I was just picking up some groceries, not expecting this conversation to go anywhere. He continued talking to me, asking more personal questions than I was comfortable with. "Are you just going home after this?" he asked, almost like he was trying to make conversation, but it felt invasive. I found myself starting to look around nervously, wondering why he was asking these kinds of questions. Still, I brushed it off, assuming he was just one of those people who were overly friendly. The conversation lasted a couple of minutes, but it was strange, oddly awkward in the way he kept trying to keep me talking. He mentioned that he had more shopping to do, but I noticed he wasn't grabbing anything else from the shelves. He just stood there, talking to me. I gave him a polite goodbye, telling him I was headed to the checkout, and he waved and walked away in the opposite direction. Nothing seemed off, at least, not then. But that was the moment when everything shifted. As I made my way to the self-checkout area, the crowd of shoppers seemed to grow thicker, with people lined up and talking amongst themselves. The noise of scanning items filled the air. When I finally finished scanning the last of my items, I looked up, and there he was again, the same man. He was in line at one of the registers, standing behind another customer, looking down at the conveyor belt. It was subtle, but I could tell it was him. He seemed to be avoiding eye contact with me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He'd told me he had a lot more shopping to do, yet here he was, checking out right behind me. I didn't think too much of it at first, but the whole situation seemed a little strange. I finished my transaction, gathered my bags, and walked out of the store. I was already starting to feel uneasy, but I figured it was just my imagination. I loaded my groceries into the car and headed home. The afternoon had been fine, but my mind kept wandering back to the man in the store. Something about his actions seemed off. I pulled into my driveway and carried the bags inside, setting them down one by one. It wasn't until I was finished unpacking and went to the front window to look outside that I noticed something strange. A car was driving down the street, slowing as it passed my house. At first, I didn't think much of it. People drove by all the time, but then the car turned into my driveway. I froze. Who was it? I didn't recognize the car, and I certainly didn't expect anyone. The driveway was quiet, and the only person who ever came around was my neighbor, who had been living next door for years. But this car didn't belong to anyone in my neighborhood. The door opened, and my heart skipped a beat. There he was, the man from Walmart. The same man. He stepped out of the car and looked around for a moment before heading straight for my front door. My pulse quickened, panic flooding my body. What was he doing here? How did he even know where I lived? I quickly ducked down, pressing myself against the floor, my breathing shallow. The curtains were pulled back just enough for me to see him, but I hoped to God that he wouldn't notice me. I didn't know if he had seen me or not, but I wasn't taking any chances. I heard the knock at the door, loud and clear. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't sure if he was just being strange or if something far worse was about to happen. He knocked again, and I stayed silent, not daring to move. I couldn't even hear his footsteps anymore, but my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Minutes passed in eerie silence. Then, when I finally worked up the courage to peek over the windowsill, I saw that he was no longer at the front door. He was at the side window now, looking in through the glass, his face inches from the window. I jumped back, my mind racing. Was he trying to break in? I didn't know what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I couldn't take my eyes off the window. I had no idea how long he had been standing there, but the idea that he could see me sent a chill down my spine. What did he want? I couldn't understand why he had followed me all the way here, and the thought of him standing outside, watching me, made my skin crawl. I stayed as still as possible, trying to remain unnoticed. After what felt like an eternity, I looked again and saw that he was gone. The car was gone from the driveway, and the street was quiet again. I waited for a few more minutes, making sure that he wouldn't come back. Finally, I exhaled and allowed myself to relax, but only just. The fear lingered, and I felt like I was being watched even though I knew he was gone. I still don't know how he knew where I lived, but the thought of him tracking me after a simple conversation at Walmart was terrifying. It made me question everything I thought I knew about the world, about my safety, and about the people around me. Why had he followed me? What did he want? I don't know if I'll ever get answers to those questions, but I'm sure of one thing. I never went back to that Walmart again. It's been weeks since that day, and the fear still lingers in my mind. I've since changed my routine, and I avoid going to that Walmart at all costs. I don't trust it anymore, not after what happened. I wonder if that man is still out there, following people and waiting for the next opportunity. Maybe he's already forgotten about me, but I haven't forgotten him, and I never will. And there you have it, folks, the terrifying encounter that turned a simple shopping trip into a nightmare I'll never forget. I hope this story sent chills down your spine, just as it did mine. If you enjoyed the story and want more spine-tingling tales like this one, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends because you never know who might need a good scare tonight. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of fear. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the scariest encounters are the ones you least expect. Until next time, keep your lights on, just in case.